Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jeremy Schumacher. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the Jer in Wellness with Jer. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the channel. Today, we are back with another song review. For those of you who are new to the channel, I have zero musical talent. I have no background in music. I am merely a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a mental health professional. So I'm really digging into the content of songs. One of my specialties is religious trauma. And so when an artist like Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds puts out a song titled Wild God, I'm probably going to jump all over it. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds have been around for a long, long time, longer than I've been alive. He's been putting out music. His range is eclectic, and I have like his greatest hits on vinyl. I have a bunch of his albums on vinyl. I would say I am a fan. I would not say I'm a super fan. Like, I don't know everything. Like, I know his other band is Grinder Man, and it's noisy and a cacophony of nonsense, and I love it so much. I love his work with Warren Ellis that he's done on a bunch of soundtracks for movies. And so, yeah, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, big fan. Pretty stoked that he's got a new album coming out. I have thoughts on the new songs. This is the first song off the new album. The album is also titled Wild Gods, and the second single was titled Frogs, and they're both very biblical, which is not unusual for Nick Cave. He uses a lot of imagery from the Bible and from various scriptural backgrounds. It's not always Christianity, but it's a theme that he talks about: religion and spirituality and the existential questions of why. And so this song gets into it a little bit. Let's jump into the song, though, and we will hear the song. Hopefully the audio works well. I'm playing around with a new setup for recording, so hopefully this sounds good, and we'll check back in probably after the first break, the first chorus. Let's do it. Maybe. Come on.
Once upon a time, a wild god zoo, all to his memory, in which he was into. It was rape and pillage in the retirement village, but in his mind he was a man of great virtue and courage. And he flew out the window with his long trailing hair, and the smoke from the bodies went straight up in the air. He was a wild god searching for what all wild gods are searching for, and he flew through the dying city like a prehistoric bird. He went searching for the girl down on a Jubilee Street, but she died in a bedsit in 1993. So he flew to the top of the world and looked around and said, "Where are my people? Where are my people to bring your spirit down?"
Sorry, my setup's weird. I said I hope everything worked. I think the audio will sound better this way, but the transitions are a little chunky right now. Apologies. Mental health professional, not a professional YouTuber. So there's a couple of different ways I think to look at this song. I've listened to it a couple times before recording it. I've heard it on the radio several times. I was like, oh, I should review that. So this isn't my first introduction to the song, but I've kind of stayed away from other people's reviews. Nick Cave has a blog called the Red Hand Files. One of his more well-known songs is the Red Right Hand, which is the theme song to the fantastic show Peaky Blinders. And so the Red Hand Files are his blog, and I think he's written about the new album, and I think even talked a little bit about this song, or maybe that was in interviews. So I've kind of stayed away from that so I can give my honest opinion, and then maybe you know we can delve into some of what he said about it as we review more songs from the album or come back to the album as a whole. I think first things first, like Nick Cave's very metaphorical, allegorical while he's writing a lot of imagery, and so we can approach this from like a sort of extended allegory approach and like think about what's the symbolism and the meaning behind it, or we can kind of look at it literally. If we're looking at it literally, it sounds like um, it almost sounds like it's written from the perspective of someone who is at the end of their life. Maybe there's like dementia or Alzheimer's or something, and like flying out of the window to go and search for that meaning, or to go and find that thing that was lost. I think that could be a thing. I tend to take it more along the allegory that let's not take this too seriously. If you've listened to a lot of Nick Cave, like, we're not supposed to take it at face value. Um, a lot of his songs are not meant to be taken literally. So knowing the artist but not having the full album yet, I think kind of taking this not quite tongue in cheek but not super seriously yet. So I would approach it as like he's writing about a god who's you know coming, searching for something. He's searching for a woman down on Jubilee Street. Jubilee Street is a reference to Nick Cave's previous songs about sex work and about systemic injustice towards sex workers. And so God's coming to look for a girl down on Jubilee Street, but she died. And so God's kind of left to wander. I like the double entendre of like bring your spirit down. If we're thinking about a God coming down from heaven and then he's going to bring his spirit down with him, that could be for a blessing or for a curse, for destruction. Lots of different ways that could go. But also when we humans colloquially say like I'm feeling down, our spirits are down, it usually means we're depressed. And so one of those things where I think it's kind of, again, I would say good art is open to the interpretation of the viewer. And so it's one of those things where how you're going to interpret the song is probably where you're at when you're listening to it, how your mental state is at, what you're bringing to the song. It's open-ended enough to have some different interpretations. It probably means something specific to Nick Cave when he wrote it, and he probably had something specific in mind, but he's a good artist in that he's not just bashing you over the head with what he wants to say. I do think when he gets particularly religious, it can get a little preachy sometimes. I would say that's Nick Cave when he's not at the full height of his powers, which, like, my favorite band is Pink Floyd. I've talked about this a little bit before. While I've never done a Pink Floyd review because I think I would be 2 hours long to do a 4-minute song. But like, they have bad songs. They have 4 albums in a row with no bad songs. With mostly no bad songs. I can't even say that. Like, they have one of the best runs in music of all time, from Dark Side of the Moon through The Wall, Animals, and Wish You Were Here in between those two. And like 4 great concept albums is an insane career, let alone back to back to back to back. And even still, not all those songs on all of those albums are fantastic. So this is not me saying Nick Cave's bad. This is me saying like not every song has to be awesome. And so I think sometimes when Nick Cave gets a little too preachy or he goes a little too specific or literal is actually where his songs are maybe less potent. And then when he leaves it kind of open-ended or so much imagery that you can interpret a bunch of different ways, I think is where his songs really hit that other level. So yeah, this song seems pretty metaphorical. What little bit I've seen about the album makes me think it is a concept album. And so the songs will kind of tie into each other and will grasp more meaning from the rest of the context. But I do think this idea of like this God could bring blessings or destructions, this God could be searching for meaning of his own. I've read a lot of Nick Cave's writings. The blog is fantastic. He's led an interesting life, overcoming drug addiction, having some public relationships that ended poorly in the public eye and some other things. He's had some horrific losses, loss of one of his sons in a climbing accident, and so struggles with mental health. So he's had a lot of stuff come up in his life, and he talks about religion and spirituality. He's very critical of it, and he's also interested in the meaning making. He's interested in finding something, the why and the how, and he lands a lot on like God is love, which I think when you're raised Christian like I was, like you kind of push back on that to be like, no, God's a genocidal maniac who uh, is cast in a very human image and therefore has all those human flaws, those human flaws. And I think when Nick Cave says that, or other people who maybe weren't so raised in dogmatic Christianity, they're not saying God as described in the Bible is love. They're saying what would be a God, what would be a deity or an entity worth worshiping is love. And so it's really removed from sort of Christian or this sort of Judeo-Christian idea of a God, the Abrahamic religion's idea of God, and really more of an idea of what a deity would be. And so I think it's interesting thinking of that. I think we can kind of look at it as like a person flying out their window to escape wherever they're at and to be searching for meaning, or we can take that kind of fun big picture lens on like, what if it's capital G God? And like I work with religious trauma, so like A, it's not a thing I believe in, but also B, I think that's a really damaging concept, and especially when it gets dogmatic, is when it can be used for harm. And I think when we start with a premise of God that is flawed and is searching for meaning or is doing things like not an all powerful, not an omnipotent, not a flawless God, but a flawed God, a wild God searching for something, like I think that makes it relatable in some of the humanity. So let's move on. Apologies again for some of these more rough transitions. I'm playing with it live here. Well, it's not live. I'm working on getting it. That's what I wanted. We did it.
Wild God searching for a faraway girl who was basically a mirage that nevertheless loomed large. She would hang under the rail as he blew round the room and make love with a kind of efficient glue. And the people on the ground cried, oh, when does it start? And the wild God says it starts with a heart, with a heart, with a heart, with a heart. And the people on the ground cried, oh, when does it end? And the wild God says, well, it depends, but it mostly never ends. 'Cause I'm a wild God flying and a wild God swimming, and I'm an old sick God dying and crying and singing. Bring your spirit down. Oh, wild God's baby, wild God. Yeah, bring your spirit down. When he's moving to the flames of anarchy, and he's moving to the winds of tyranny, and the sweet, sweet tears of liberty, and moving around the world. He's moving through your body like a prehistoric bird. He's moving around the world. Oh, Lord. But if you're feeling lonely, and if you're feeling blue, and if you just don't know what to do, bring your spirit down. Oh.
Paused it there. Sorry. Also had my mic muted. We're working through some glitches here with the recording. Let me pull back up here. Apologies if you're getting into the song. It really does build a quite compelling crescendo here. Like I think Nick Cave at Loud and Noisy. Again, I like his side project Grinder Man. The Ballad of Stagger Lee is maybe my favorite Nick Cave song, which is about a bisexual cowboy killing a bunch of people loosely. That's an oversimplification of the song, but like it's loud and it's noisy, and so the Bad Seeds really coming in here. The band's making a lot of noise, and Nick Cave kind of letting his voice do what it wants. I think is really compelling, and I think this is where the lyrics get really compelling. Um, I don't know what he's doing with the prehistoric bird. Like I don't know what that imagery is supposed to be. It seems silly. God's in the first couple verses. God's searching for something, he can't find it. He goes around, it's not finding things. The people say, when does it start? God says it starts with the heart. And people say, when does it end? Well, it depends, but mostly it never ends, because I'm a wild God. I'm an old sick God dying and crying and singing. And again, this idea of not an omnipotent, all powerful God who never has anything happen, but a God who's deeply flawed. And again, I was raised very conservative Christian. I was raised to be a biblical literalist. It's the worst form of conservative Christian you can be. Like the Old Testament God is not a perfect creature. He gets mad. He gets upset. His plans are foiled by other angels, by the humans. So this idea of like omnipotent, all powerful, unquestionable, really doesn't quite fit their own Judeo-Christian version of God story. But the song is not approaching it this way. This is almost like kind of the old Greek gods who took up human form and then did very human things and had sex with humans and um, you know had children and problems and all sorts of things. So this God is old and sick and dying and crying and singing. And again, I think this is a lot about Nick Cave's kind of philosophy of a life lived, a wildly successful artist, celebrity, world tours, um, dating other celebrities, having public relationships, having them sour and fall apart, having people join his band, leave his band, having side projects, all this stuff, having a family, losing a family member, like all this stuff. When you look at his life, I think sort of that ethos is like all of this human experience is meaningful. The loss makes what we have more important, makes us aware and pay attention to the limited time we have. The good things make life worth living, and the bad things bring those good things into sharper focus. And again, like this is not necessarily a psychology or philosophy that I'm accepting of. This is, I think, explaining the song. Um, Bring your spirit down. Again, that could be an invitation to come with, or that could be let's get down in the dirt and get depressed together kind of thing. He's moving through the flames of anarchy. He's moving through the winds of tyranny and the sweet, sweet tears of liberty, moving around the world like a prehistoric bird. Again, I don't know what we're doing with the bird. A prehistoric bird is a dinosaur, right? That's what that is. He's moving through. So like the song kind of has a little bit of a bridge, and then it's going to shift here, even though it's all building up to this crescendo. Um, this God who is a tyrant who creates, the flames, who moves through the flames of anarchy. Again, is he the cause of the anarchy? Is he bringing chaos into the disorder? Again, I think that's all depending on what you're bringing into it. I think for a lot of people, where spirituality and religion comes in, is they're looking for a reason. They're looking for some answers to the existential questions of why. Why did I have this significant loss when there is war or there is natural disaster? Church attendance goes up. People are looking to have a reason or a meaning behind things that they cannot control. And also, I think people leaving the church in droves now, being like, the church isn't in control of any of this, and the church's approaches to control doesn't make any sense. It's abusive and harmful to people. Um, I've talked about this at length at other in other videos, but this idea that one way to control people's behavior is to limit their access to information. That's what the church did for centuries, and that's how they stayed in power for so long. And the internet, the rise of the internet, has really taken that away so many people have access to the internet, and very little of what the church stands for is either consistent. So the hypocrisy is apparent, the problems with the church are apparent, and also a wealth of information that makes these dogmatic religions um, kind of crumble is also apparent to people until you're kind of whittling down to a really extreme group of people. But again, in the song, we have this idea of a God through anarchy, through tyranny, and through liberty. And I would tend to say, like, for a lot of people's version of God, a dogmatic approach to a God, when you're beholden to it, that's when you have freedom. But like, it's that kind of 1984 doublethink where like war is peace, um, slavery is freedom. Like this idea that you're beholden to this God, that unconditional love is very conditional, and if you don't follow those conditions, you suffer eternally. Like that dogmatic approach of a God is very problematic. Um, so this God who's very human and very fallible and very messy and going through all these things and growing and having problems and having to learn and grow and stretch from these things, I think is again like this idea of like God as a concept as opposed to a deity, and what that means for us as human beings. So, and maybe that's just the wild part of it, right? Like maybe that's a young god or a new god or rising into power. Again, I haven't done this. I talk about comics a lot. So like Neil Gaiman, Gaiman. I don't. One of the worst things about doing these videos is I'm really bad at pronouncing names. I was an avid reader as a child and never practiced saying things out loud, so I don't know how to do that stuff, especially celebrity names. Wrote American Gods, was turned into a show. Obviously, The Sandman is big on Netflix and one of the best comic runs of all time. So lots of again ideas around like gods. What does a god look like? American Gods is very much about like the old gods, like Odin and Loki, and some of those gods struggling with like a god of like television, of like capitalism, and some of these things. And so, what would the new gods look like versus those old gods? And um, yeah, so I think it's a fun concept to play with. I'll be very curious what's going on with the rest of the album. Let's see if I cannot screw up this transition and move into the rest of the song.
Wildcats, baby, we're wildcats. I'm a wildcat, baby, I'm a wildcat. Here we go. We're going to the cradle of Africa. We're going to Russia. We're going to China. To the United States of America. Yeah, moving around the world. Yeah, moving like a great big beautiful bird. Moving around the world. Yeah, he's swimming to the end of a rotting pier. He swims to the end of his rotting ideas. Swim to the hill, swim to the prayer, and bring your spirit down. I'm a wild god, baby, I'm a wild god. Well, here we go. Yeah, here we go.
Slow to turn my mic back on. So that's Wild God by Nick Cave. As a musician, going to the cradle of Africa, going to Russia, going to China, going to the United States, um, the skeptical part of me is like, that's a good way to announce a world tour. But I like the lyrics, and this is where, like, honestly, where the song kind of is saved for me, because as someone who's kind of works with a religious trauma and doesn't get a lot of meaning from that imagery and that perspective on the world anymore at this point in my life personally, I do find that the wild god, the big beautiful bird, the prehistoric bird, what I find is like swimming towards the end of the rotting pier. He swims to the end of his rotting idea. Swim to the hymn, swim to the prayer, bring your spirit down. And like for me, that's so. If you're like a good little Christian still who was raised in a conservative Christian environment, probably like, yes, like God's coming down to save us from this rotting world. But if you're viewing it from my perspective as somebody who's post that Christian conservative upbringing, like, right, if this was an all-powerful, all-good God, then he's failed miserably, and so those two things can't be true. And so the fact that the world is where it is, and there's suffering, there's human suffering, there's animal suffering. Animal suffering tends to be one of the better, has not been refuted arguments against God. There's no reason to create animals that will suffer, that humans will never interact with. I'm oversimplifying there and not super interested in getting into counter apologetics, but yeah. So this rotting idea, and that swimming, the imagery is with. There's a lot of water imagery in his two songs he's released so far, so I'm guessing that's going to be one of the extended allegories in the album. Um, but also, like, what happens when you're swimming and you're struggling, then you're drowning, and so that little bit of imagery towards, like, being out of control, or we're struggling, we're striving towards something, and it's not there. The pier is rotting, it's falling apart under our feet. This idea is rotting. So swim to the hymn, swim to the prayer, like, and it might not save you. You still might have your spirit down at the end of it all. And then kind of it's like he's almost like enthused at the end of it. I'm a wild god, baby. Here we go. Yeah, here we go. Again, like, kind of a maybe a tongue in cheek of, like, kicking off this world tour. I don't think that's what he means. That's just the skeptic, cynical side of my brain. I do think kind of that idea of, like, a wild god, a young god, or a god who's old and in denial of that, and trying to throw off the old age and be young again for a minute. Like, this idea of, like, running through the anarchy, the tyranny, liberty, and then, the rotting pier, like, this journey he's gone on, and he's just like, let's keep going, with no thought or concept towards what he's left behind. This sort of euphoria of not having to care about anything. And I do think that's the tyrannical view of a dogmatic approach to, like, God of the Bible. Is he is not all loving, he is not caring. Love your neighbor, but I will burn people in hell if they don't love me the way I want them to. It's very dark. So Nick Cave, I'm a huge fan, so I'm biased. I was excited he had new music. I was excited to listen to it when I first heard it on the radio live. And I said new music from Nick Cave. I was like, hell yeah. So I'm a fan, so I'm a little bit biased. This is not my favorite song of his. I did this one instead of Frogs, though, because I didn't feel like there was as much to talk about with Frogs, and I think Frogs has some references that will make more sense in the full album. So 2 songs out by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds off the new album. I liked his album Carnage, which was the last one he did. Most of his albums have been really good, and also, like, all over the place. Like, to listen to, like, Dig Lazarus Dig versus, like, Ghost Teen is, like, totally different. And so this journey of musicianship he's had over his life as an artist, like, you can really look at, like, yeah, that sounds like a 1980s album, like, oof. And then, like, the album he's making sense of losing his kid, like, a very different song. So there's a lot of depth and a lot of things to find in his music that can really match where you're at. So again, I'm optimistic while not loving this song specifically. It's a fun journey. It's a good song. I just don't like it that much. I am excited for the album as a whole to see what the whole thing sounds like. Call me an old head or born in the wrong generation, but I want to hear the whole album to make sense of it before I weigh in and put my final stamp of approval or disapproval on it. Approval enough. I've listened to it a bunch of times and will continue to do so. So I guess that's the thing. Shout out to all my people who've commented on videos, and I've got some videos coming up that I'm super stoked for. We got some stuff coming up for Pride Month. It's June. Happy Pride, everybody. Specific to that, I'm excited to do some videos related to Pride and that topic. I'm still working through my superhero, the DC movies. We're working through them, gang. So those are coming up, and then shout out to people who've commented. I've got some songs coming up, some reviews on content that people have requested in the comments. So I love that stuff. It helps me organize my thoughts. It gives me something to kind of ground wanting to talk about psychology and mental health around certain pop culture things. So if there's a song or there's a thing you're interested in and you want to hear more about, or you want to hear my take on, drop down in the comments, like, subscribe, all that stuff's helpful. It is June when I'm recording here. It's Pride Month. Happy Pride. We have new merch available. We've got some guests on the podcast talking about mental health and the LGBTQ plus community and advocacy and allyship and being queer and neurodivergent, and a lot of good stuff is over on the podcast. That's Your Therapist Needs Therapy podcast, which also is here on my YouTube channel. So lots of stuff going on. Would love for you to be involved. Like, subscribe, share, drop down in the comments. Love the feedback, love the interaction. Love to talk about mental health. So thanks for stopping by and checking out the channel. Do all those YouTubey things. We appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Peace.